I hated the way he played. I absolutely hated the way he played.
And I'm like, this guy's a scrub. He's like, he up tilts everywhere. He runs around just playing the game, super scrubby.
There's always like a few people who are like exceptional, who are like better than the rest.
Like, I remember almost crying that day.
You can argue about his skill, you can argue about his personality, you can argue about his playstyle. One thing that you can't argue though was his success.
April 25th, 2020. 15 years since the development of Super Smash Flash began. The largest Super Smash Flash 2 tournament of all time took place. Bowlers 3. 512 registered players. A prize pot of $500. This was it. That small 2014 grassroots community evolved all the way to this very tournament. Everyone who was anyone would be attending. In fact, 13 of the top 15 ranked players across the world would be in attendance. But there could only be one at the top. The game was being pushed to its absolute limits. Every intricacy, every small detail, anything they could do to be better than the rest. To these players, it was more than just a flash game. Playing, grinding, practicing, all for this moment, to try and become the greatest of all time. But before all of that, we need to go back. The year is 2006. The most recent Smash Bros. Game to release was Melee, 5 years prior. And on August 21st of that year, a little flash game by the name of Super Smash Flash was released by aspiring game developer Cloud9. A Super Smash Bros. Fan game created with the Adobe Flash engine. The game was fit with a familiar Smash Bros. Roster, with characters such as Mario, Link, and Pikachu. However, what stood out the most was the more unique characters, such as Mr. Incredible, Naruto, and Sonic original character, Blade. The game was a hit. It was the Flash game to be played in computer labs across the world. The game found a lot of success on Flash game websites such as Newgrounds.
So the number one game that everybody would go play was Super Smash Flash, the original one, number one.
It was the closest thing anyone had to playing Smash Bros. On the PC. The game itself heavily resembled Super Smash Bros. Melee, in aspects from its menu design all the way to its in-game music. Ironically though, the biggest difference was the competitive aspects of Super Smash Flash. To be quite frank, the original was not competitive. Partly due to the incredibly small size of the competitive scene back in 2006, combined with the far less refined gameplay of Super Smash Flash. It was more of a fun, casual proof of concept more than anything. And even though it hasn't aged the best, for a Flash game in '06, it was pretty good. And as one might have expected, with Cloud9's huge success that was Super Smash Flash, a new idea came to mind. Something we all know and love. Super Smash Flash 2, the sequel to the original Super Smash Flash. Due to the success of Super Smash Flash, Cloud9 almost immediately began work on the sequel, having early development builds dated as early as December 2007. The goal was to improve on everything that made the original Super Smash Flash so fun. The first build was already a major improvement, having much higher quality sprites and adding the ability to do special moves, a feature that wasn't present in the original game. And while the game still lacked some core mechanics such as shielding and grabbing, it was already much closer to traditional Smash Bros, albeit with far less content, only having 3 stages, 2 of which were test stages, and only having these 4 original fighters. So Cloud9 went to work, and 1 year later we received version 0.3. This build was really the first content update for the game, adding Sonic as a playable fighter and Final Destination as a brand new stage. And more importantly for competitive play, this build introduced grabbing and shielding, 2 core mechanics for competitive play. There were some noticeable issues, such as no dedicated grab button. So to perform a grab, you'd have to do an attack while shielding. These were some pretty massive changes to the game, and while it wasn't clear at the time, it was creating the foundations for a competitive game. Throughout the span of the next 3 years, from 2009 to 2011, the game would receive 4 major content updates, starting with version 0.4 in 2009. This update added Link as a new playable fighter, as well as 2 additional stages, being Dreamland and the fan favorite from Melee, Hyrule Temple. Additionally, this was also the first build to add team battles in a 2 vs 2 format. And then, 6 months later, in June of 2009, Update 0.5 would drop, adding 2 additional characters, Smash Flash veteran Naruto, and newcomer to the series, Mega Man. This was also the first build to actually add a menu UI, with the new sleek look combined with an actual in-game announcer.
Naruto! Mega Man!
1 year later, in June of 2010, version 0.6 would drop. This was one of the biggest builds yet, having a brand new unique title screen, combined with new features such as a training mode and the ability to disable items. A new playable fighter was also added, being Sora from Kingdom Hearts. Sora was the most ambitious character yet, having a unique stance-like mechanic swapping between lightning, ice, and fire magic, as well as a very unique glide mechanic similar to Meta Knight in Super Smash Bros. Brawl. In terms of content, this update was huge, adding a whopping 7 new stages from across the various Smash Flash universes. This included some soon-to-be fan favorites such as Tower of Salvation and Hidden Leaf Village. The game's content was getting pretty respectable, and the roster fairly intriguing. We began to see Cloud9's approach to adding new characters to the Smash Flash games, adding characters such as Naruto and Sora, characters you wouldn't see in traditional Smash Bros. This is a common trend for Super Smash Flash, even in future updates, adding characters such as Goku, Luffy, and even Waluigi. These interesting and unique characters were a major draw to the game. In fact, we can almost pinpoint the success of Super Smash Flash to the version 2011 0.7. Having the more improved title screen with the iconic logo, adding 5 new playable characters, being Goku, Ness, Peach, Tails, and Wario, as well as 1 secret unlockable fighter, being Black Mage. 0.7 was the first build that felt like the Super Smash Flash 2 we all know and love. It was around this time that on the McLeod Gaming forums, a Super Smash Flash 2 community was beginning to grow. Players from across the world would discuss the game here, usually casually, but sometimes in a new way. Much like Smashboards around this time, this was a place that was used by some players to discuss the competitive elements of the game. We also began to see the first examples of competitive footage, with combo videos against computer players. And 7 months later, we saw what the game could truly be. At a large Super Smash Bros. Melee tournament, known as Genesis 2, in a faraway corner of the venue, a build of 0.7 was being played locally in a competitive format for the first time in the game's history. This was really the first instance of anything truly like this. This was the dawn of competitive Smash Flash. This tournament, and other footage from competitive players, were the catalysts that would shape the very game itself. In fact, at this point, the developers took note of this competitive interest, and would begin to make changes to promote that interest.
Over time, just through seeing these videos pop up and seeing that there was a possibility there for potential competitive, I started having conversations with Cloud9 where I was like, hey, why don't we try this? Let's try bumping up the hit stun. Let's try bumping up the hit lag.
And with a little bit of luck, this renaissance of the Super Smash Flash 2 community was occurring at the same time as the resurrection of Super Smash Bros. Melee's competitive scene. This was a major influence on the next few builds of Super Smash Flash, 0.8A and 0.9A. However, if the game wanted to reach its full potential, it would need to grow even more. But it had a sort of roadblock. Due to limited availability of players locally, the game didn't really have that competitive scene that Melee had. This was a challenge for the community, this sort of invisible force stopping the game from being great. And the developers got to work. And in 2014, they would break the barrier. Super Smash Flash 2 version 0.9b. On the surface, just a run-of-the-mill Super Smash Flash update. New characters, new stages, and even a new UI. But in reality, this build was the most influential event in the game's entire history. The feature that changed Flash 2 forever.
The launch of online definitely was significant. So many people downloaded the game that day.
9B being online was like the craziest thing in the world, man. I still am like baffled how they got online working.
What? You can play online? I never did this before.
I remember everyone was really bad. Yeah, the players were not good.
Like we weren't entirely sure if it was gonna break, and it did.
Online mode opened the floodgates of opportunity. Super Smash Flash 2 finally had its chance. What lied beyond the barrier for Flash 2 was the foundational pillars for a competitive scene. The redevelopments to the game, only possible due to the newly added online mode. First was the growth of content. The game blew up massively in popularity. This was many people's first time ever hearing about Super Smash Flash, hearing that it finally had an online mode. This drew in a lot of new players, specifically a lot of YouTubers and streamers who started playing the game, such as HungryBox,
Up to rest confirmed.
AlphaRad,
Okay, well, I just now made it.
and Etika,
Is Super Smash Flash 2. This game has been amazing and cribbing.
who were all in support of the game and increased its popularity. And it wasn't just big names, we began to see some Super Smash Flash 2 specific creators rise around this time, such as streamers like Soldier Sunday.
I am Zachary Jonathan Pinturf, also known as Soldier Sunday.
Back then, I watched a lot of Soldier Sunday. Shout out to him.
And Ninja Lobster Studios, who were innovating the competitive SSF2 content creation. Combine this with the all-time high that was competitive Smash around this time, with the recent release of the Super Smash Bros. Melee documentary, as well as the release of Smash 4 coming out later this year, interest in competitive SSF2 was at an all-time high, and the player base grew massively. And with the new player base leads to the second pillar, the new community. The community changed a lot when 9B released. Due to the rapid growth of the community, a lot of new group chats started forming. The Super Smash Flash 2 subreddit, the Facebook group chats, and even Skype calls for players to group together and play matches with one another. The largest, of course, was still the McLeod Gaming forums. However, it wasn't the best for setting up matches with other competitive players, since it was primarily used by the casual community. After all, it was still a Flash game. This led some forum users to try and make a more serious, united competitive chat room, outside of the McLeod Gaming forums. The IRC, Internet Relay Chat Room. This was the most bare-bones 2014 chat room experience you could get. However, for a grassroots community like this, it was all we needed.
Skype was alright, but in the early days it was IRC that took off.
And then from the forums, I heard about this chat called the IRC. It had like 20 people that are like active there.
Unfortunately, most chat logs from the IRC were never archived. However, the chat room was serving as the most active community for setting up matches, essentially Discord before Discord ever existed. And from 2014 to 2015, this was the place to be if you were a competitive player, and also to play in tournaments. This was the third pillar of competitive Smash Flash, tournaments. With all of these players in one place, online tournaments started to sprout up. Starting out, they typically had around 12 to 15 players, no cash prize, and varying rule sets with changing stock counts and stage lists between each. However, the question still stood: who was the best player? It was a fairly chaotic time, and while some names stood out at the start as better than others, no one particular player could be considered the best. It was an early period where anyone could beat everyone. There was no true best player. And with so many players competing, it was only a matter of time until someone would show up. Someone would take the throne. And 2 months after the game came out, someone showed up. But who was Kios? Well, he was a Zero Suit Samus player from the tri-state area, coming from a background of playing Super Smash Bros. Brawl at a competitive level for many years, only trying out Super Smash Flash 2 starting in October of 2014. In terms of the community though, he was a nobody. However, that would soon change. October 18th, Kios would enter Smash Island 6, the 6th installment of the most popular tournament series, Smash Island. With a total of 27 entrants, which at the time was a massive amount, Kiyo's was seeded as 16th, which would match him against the #1 player in the tournament as his very first competitive match. And let's just say, it didn't go as expected. Defeating the #1 seed of the tournament, Kiyo's did the impossible in his very first competitive match. An impressive feat by itself, but unfortunately, he was knocked into loser's bracket right after that by Link player Marvin, another contender for the throne. However, in a double elimination tournament, Kiyo's was sent to the loser's bracket, meaning he could still qualify to win the tournament. And after defeating 5 different opponents in the loser's side, Kiyo's clawed his way back to a solid 2nd place finish, once again being defeated by Marvin. 2nd place at your very first tournament is an incredible feat.
So, Kiyo's is actually how he pronounces it. He kind of just started winning out of nowhere.
And 1 week later, the Super Smash Flash 2 subreddit hosted the largest tournament the game had ever seen. In attendance was Soldier Sunday and Marvin. And first up for Kiyo's was the streamer Soldier Sunday.
I thought he was a decent to good player at the time.
Kiyo's managed to not only defeat Soldier Sunday in his 2nd match of the tournament, but he managed to make his way all the way to Grand Finals, where he faced Marvin once again. Defeating Marvin in Grand Finals 6-0 in the largest tournament ever. This win, only 1 week into his career, put Kiyo's on top of the world. And he wasn't just a one-hit wonder. He would continue to win multiple other weekly tournaments throughout October, November, and December. In fact, he won 7 of his first 10 FCR tournaments, placing 2nd at the remaining 3. He was the name of the competitive community, with some criticism from others.
I think Kiyo's was definitely one of those players that you would consider, he would be the definition of play to win. You may not like what he does, but at the end of the day, he's winning.
He was kind of the first player to get real good. During that time, he was basically unstoppable.
It was around this time that Zero Suit Samus began to be ranked higher amongst community-made tier lists.
He kind of was the reason that people were saying Zero Suit Samus was the best in 9B.
But it wasn't just ZSS that rose in the ranks. Let's talk FCR, Flash Collective Ranking. This was a ranking system created using a database of Flash 2 tournaments. It was used to calculate a ranking of the best players in the world, and included its own class system that goes as follows. Peasants, a title given to any player who entered an FCR tournament, regardless of their results. Knights, players who place within the top 3 of at least one FCR qualified tournament. Kings, these were the few players who actually managed to win a major tournament. And lastly was a role only occupied by Kiyo's. Gods, players who showed dominance over all others. This was the order after the chaos, the new hierarchy of SSF2. And Kiyo's, for 2014, ruled it all. December 27th, the last major tournament of the year, X1. In attendance was Kiyo's, the favorite to win the whole event. However, this was no ordinary tournament. This was the debut of a new competitor. a challenger to Kios' reign. Lunary would enter his very first Super Smash Flash 2 tournament.
My name is Ali, and my tag is Lunary. I live in Belgium. So like back in 09B, I mean Meta Knight and Lloyd was my secondary.
Lunary was the antithesis of Kios, a Meta Knight and Lloyd dual main from Belgium, coming from a background of playing Super Smash Bros. Melee competitively. And much like many of the greats, he found almost immediate success, outperforming his seeded position by winning his first 2 sets. Lunary was set to face Kios for their very first time. Kios defeated Lunary 2-1 in their very first set. However, Lunary, a nobody at the time, taking a game off of Kios was an impressive feat. In fact, he would finish 3rd in the tournament overall, only having lost to the 2nd and 1st place players. Not only did this tournament show off a new up-and-coming challenger being Lunary, but it was also one of the few tournaments Kios did not end up winning, taking 2nd place against French Samus player Sekanor.
Because Sekanor beat Kios in set 1, and then like Kios just rage quitted. So
this was the first crack in Kios' dominance. 1 month later at Smash Island 9, the 2 players would meet in a rematch. But this time, things were a little more interesting. And with that, Lunary had defeated Kios. And with the momentum of such a big win over Kios, he managed to win the entire event through winner's bracket, securing his first ever major tournament win. On the other hand, Kios opted to drop out of the tournament in loser's side, shortly after his loss to Lunary. Lunary was in the spotlight of the community.
He just entered a tournament and got like, I think top 3 right off the bat. And I remember just being like, who is this?
If we randomly would match up, I'd be like kind of excited, but then also like terrified.
This was the start of the rivalry between Kios and Lunary, meeting one another at every major tournament in the first quarter of 2015.
So yeah, so like back then, like Kios was my biggest rival by far. He was the only player who took like more than 1 set against me.
The 2 went back and forth trading sets. Kios bounced back by winning X2 over Lunary, but 1 month later, Lunary would defeat Kios at X3. And at the time, the record between the 2 was extremely close. But over time, this rivalry became more than just the game.
As far as Kios goes, in relation to Lunary, they didn't like each other at all.
The problem stemmed from like Kios would just get really mad, really salty when he lost. He would just try to discredit Lunary, and then the beef just grew from there.
I thought he was kind of a dick. At least to me, he was like a little toxic, and he was also like a sore loser. Like he was so salty whenever he lost.
There was a split in the community, whether you were a Kios fan or a Lunary fan.
At the peak of this rivalry in 2015, between Lunary and Kios neck and neck in sets, a crew battle was proposed to settle the beef once and for all.
Like we talk a lot of shit, like a lot of trash, like so much trash. And then like at some point we're like, you know what, screw it. You have to settle this.
The US versus EU crew battle. The 8 best US players with Kios as their frontrunner versus the 8 best EU players with Lunary as their ace. The crew battle was extraordinarily close, and as the stocks for both teams kept going down, eventually we had the match everyone was waiting for, Kios versus Lunary. This time, both players representing their whole region. Despite the odds, Lunary had done it, defeating Kios for all of Europe. The crew battle would continue on, eventually leading to an EU victory by 3 stocks. Europe as a region was stronger than ever, and their best player, Lunary, the best in the world. And whether by coincidence or not, after that crew battle, Lunary went on a rampage, winning almost every tournament he entered in April, May, and June. Not only defeating Kios in almost every set they played, but Lunary was beating everyone. In fact, he had a winning record against every player he played in FCR tournaments. On the other hand, Kios was being left behind, the gap between them increasing, and their set record less competitive than ever. July 2015. Lunary was the best player in the world, the second player to ever receive the classification of God of the game. And throughout that summer, we saw Lunary enter less and less tournaments. The ones he did enter though, he would win. However, for Lunary, being the best wasn't quite what he hoped.
The pressure of being the best is something like a lot of people don't realize, because at some point, winning is just expected of you. Losing feels super bad, and winning doesn't feel as great because you're supposed to win. And then you have also people who just want you to lose because they're like so tired of you winning everything.
In August of 2015, he announced his retirement from the game. Only 7 months into his career, Lunary was going to quit competitive Super Smash Flash. He listed a variety of reasons for why, but the primary reason was to focus on competing in Super Smash Bros. Melee, a game he was deeply passionate about.
I deemed that Melee was more important to me, so in 2015, I just said, yeah, I'm gonna retire.
This announcement was devastating to the community. Many players, including his rival Kios, were sad to see him go. However, Lunary announced he would enter one final tournament, Smash Island 15. It was the last chance for the community to take down Lunary, including for Kios.
Grim for Kylos right now. Is it real? That's it. It's done. It's over. Lunary 3-0 over Kylos.
Meta Knight.
I could understand how Kios would feel. He didn't even get to beat his rival the last time they played, so it kind of it was a little bit of the end of an era.
And with Lunary's final victory over Kios, winning Smash Island 15, the community was left to pick up the scraps, and Kios reclaimed the vacant #1 spot. It was still unargued, though, that Lunary was the best player of 2015. The year is 2016, 6 months after Lunary's retirement. The SSF2 community had changed quite a bit in the post-Lunary era, with 2 major differences that would begin to shape up the next year of competition. In 2016, IRC was a thing of the past, being replaced by 3 new equally important groups. First was the McLeod Gaming Slack chat, a private chat room for veteran players as well as developers of the game. The second new chat room was Flash Nation, the very first Super Smash Flash 2 Discord server. And lastly was Anther's Ladder, a ranked ladder website for competitive Smash Flash. And with these 2 chat rooms, a lot of new players entered the competitive scene. In fact, we saw a massive growth in terms of player base, roughly doubling in size in terms of entrants and tournaments. The Flash Nation Discord was a fairly new thing in 2016, so it wasn't the biggest source of new players. That would be Anther's Ladder. Anther's Ladder at the time was a website that had a ranked ladder for Super Smash Bros. Melee and Smash 4 players, and in late 2015, they announced to be adding Super Smash Flash 2 to Anther's Ladder. And while the Slack and Discord were fairly big, Anther's Ladder was massive.
There's so many players that were just like joining the scene through Anthers and getting their first taste of like competitive Flash 2.
Anthers introduced a plethora of new competitive players, all of which were grinding and practicing all the time for a higher rank on the ladder. This was the defining trait of this time period.
We made it! Look at it. Number 1.
It's where all the new players started, all the old players would go to find new opponents, and where even most of the major tournaments were held. And while having all these new players is a good thing, it did come with some downsides.
We were always, no matter what, behind screen. Nobody could reprimand us for what was said and what we could do.
Like everyone would shit talk you about like how good you actually are.
The idea of common, basic human decency did not exist.
Okay, who's the best player? Who's the best player? I'm better than you. I'm better than you. That sort of thing.
In terms of the community, this was the era of trash talk and Anther's Ladder. But it wasn't just the community that changed, it was also the character choices. Although Super Smash Flash 2 has had many different tier lists throughout its life, 9B has one of the most interesting developments. Much like Super Smash Bros. Melee, 9B had a fairly asymmetrical balance, with top tiers being miles ahead of the low tiers. And even though that was the case, and with little to no balance changes over a course of 3 years, we still saw some drastic changes in character placements over the years. Many community-made tier lists in 2015 ranked Meta Knight, Lloyd, Marth, and Zero Suit Samus as the strongest in the game. But starting in 2016, we saw some new characters start to win tournaments. Previously underdeveloped characters such as Black Mage, Kirby, and even Sora began to perform well in tournaments. We even saw Kios around this time experiment with new character choices such as Peach, considered a low tier at the time. The meta was evolving, but there was one other character that was the star of this renaissance, all led by one player. Gax. In 2016, we saw a lot of new players, but this one in particular stood out amongst the rest, his main being Fox, arguably one of the fastest and most technically demanding characters in the entire game. For many years now, the Smash Flash Fox has been theorized as a potential top tier, having similar top tier characteristics as Melee Fox, with the incredible speed, insane kill power, and flashy tech skill. Up until this point, no one had truly shown off just how strong Fox could truly be. However, in 2016, we saw a surge of new Fox players join the game. Out of all the new characters in the Anthers meta, Fox was the most prominent, partly due to the increase in Melee players trying Smash Flash 2 for the first time on Anthers. One such Fox player being Gax would show us what the character could truly do. The year was 20XX.
He has this very Melee-esque to him that you kind of just get frustrated and you wonder, why isn't this guy playing Melee?
Gax was really hyped to watch back in the day. The way he moved...
When people thought of movement, they thought of him.
Gax played a very fast Fox.
I remember playing him back on Anthers. He absolutely destroyed me, bro. Like, 4-stock. It's not even close.
There was a short period of time called the Gax era.
Gax, as well as this new generation of Fox mains, began to perform increasingly well, starting from winning small weekly tournaments with the character, all the way to winning monthly majors. The meta was Fox. By mid-2016, Gax had risen the ranks, reaching the #1 spot on the FCR, the only player in the game to be ranked as a god of the game, with even Kios being ranked below him. Although, this era of Gax was quite interesting, because sure, he had won many tournaments, but he wasn't unbeatable. He would still drop tournament sets to other high-level players throughout 2016, and despite being the best player on the FCR, he actually had a losing record against many of the high-level players, who just simply didn't enter as often. Gax was #1, but he was on shaky ground. If he wanted to cement himself as the best in the community, he would need to prove it at one last major. Online EVO, the largest tournament of the summer. And after Gax destroyed his side of the bracket, he awaited Kios in Winners Finals. However, Kios was defeated by up-and-coming Kirby player T-Lord. And instead of seeing Kios vs Gax, we had a Gax vs T-Lord Finals, in which Gax would opt to play his secondaries. Gax was the winner of Online EVO. This was a massive win for Gax, and although it did solidify him as #1, it did come with some questioning from the community, as Gax still had yet to defeat Kios in an FCR tournament. Regardless, for the 3rd year in a row, a new player had shown up, taken the scene by storm, and become the best in the world. "2017, perhaps the most famous year in Super Smash Bros. 2 history, for good and bad reasons. As far as years go, 2014 was the rise of Kios, 2015 the era of Lunary, and 2016 had just wrapped up as the year of 20XX, with all these new school Fox players. So naturally, what kind of year was 2017? Oh boy. 2017 was the craziest year in Super Smash Bros. 2 history. For starters, going into 2017, Gax was still the best player in the world. However, Gax, Kios, and many of these other top-level players would actually take a break from the game at the end of 2016. And while there were still some tournaments, they were far less frequent and smaller in attendance. And the reason all of these players took a break from the game at the same time was for one reason.
We always had this idea in the back of our head that 1.0 would be the full game. And so it just became larger and larger and larger over time.
We were expecting beta for, God, like 2 years at this point.
Dude, beta was probably the most anticipating thing that you have ever seen.
Every year we had been going to these tournaments and doing reveals at the tournaments, and the longer that beta was taking to come out, the more things we'd have to reveal. So we were like scope creeping.
It was like 9B players in general, we're just always looking forward to beta. Like, hype for beta was already at an all-time high because of that.
You know, it was a lot of pressure. And, you know, the community got very impatient. There were a lot of leaks. So to have that hard work revealed before we wanted it to be, it was just devastating, honestly. Like, I remember almost crying that day. We just were like, that's it. We gotta release it. That's the only way to make this stop.
This is beta. It's out. It's public for you guys. You guys can play it.
And beta was a very drastic reimagining of the Smash Flash formula.
SSF2 beta was like, it's SSF3 without saying that it's SSF3.
Thank you guys so much for making this cloud gaming.
The big update, like everybody's been waiting for, like it's pretty crazy.
New people coming in every week, and just overall everything's changed. And I've seen a lot of people come and go. Like
Super Smash Bros. 2 Beta, the largest content update the game would ever receive. The surprise drop in May of 2017, while not in 100% polished state, would change the community forever. Beta was a game changer. Literally, it changed the game fundamentally. New characters, a complete overhaul of mechanics, and more content jammed into one fan game than ever seen before. And just like when 9B released, it wasn't just the game that changed. This changed everything for competitive Smash Flash. The game's community exploded with new players. Tons of new Discord servers started popping up, plenty of new tournament series with entrant counts nearing the triple digits, and more players playing the game online than ever before. The beta was a breath of fresh air. The community was now more alive than ever. As one could imagine, the game played significantly different than 9B. The jump between the two was comparable to, say, Smash 4 and Ultimate, with some similarities but also major differences. And while the game was certainly not perfect on launch, with plenty of bugs on release, it was still a competitive experience that drew in players from all over the FGC. One such player was redid, a Dutch Smash 4 player who joined SSF2 after hearing about the launch of beta, but more on him later. With all these new players and a brand new scene, 2017 was the year of beta. Specifically though, in the context of the competitive scene, the year of beta was considered by many the jankiest time in the game's history. After all, beta was surprise dropped mid-year in 2017, so for the first half of the year, all these 9B results were basically nullified with its release. And while some of these 9B players could make the transition into beta successfully, such as Gax and Kios, other players would struggle to get the same results they had in 9B. The competitive scene was completely different. All except one thing: Gax. The 9B veteran would almost immediately bounce back to the top.
Gax was the player that could transfer his skills over to beta. Not very many other players could do that.
In fact, Gax would win all 3 of his first major tournaments in beta's lifespan. Universe Classic 3, Bowlers 1,
Wow, that up B actually gonna gimp him.
and Smash Island Beta 1.
Back here, up here. Or just go straight for the up smash.
Even after taking a break while waiting for beta to release, he was able to immediately jump back into competition and become the best player. And not shockingly, Fox rose dramatically in community-made tier lists with beta's release, placing himself as second best in the game. When it came to Gax and Fox, the character and player were so intertwined that they were simultaneously being the best at their respective ranks. So one has to wonder, is this year of 2017 just another year of Gax? Well, not quite. While Gax was the best, early beta was still competitive. In specific, we saw the rise of 2 other players that could rival Gax. First was again redid, this new Dutch Isaac player who was one of the only players who could defeat Gax in tournament, which was especially impressive because he hadn't even played 9B competitively. As for the other player that rose around this period, his tag was Flavian. And let's just say, quote-unquote Flavian was not your average SSF2 competitor. In 2017, we saw the rise of another Fox player, Flavian. Flavian was notorious throughout the community, because you see, quote-unquote Flavian was actually a secret alt account for an old-school 9B player, Monty. This Monty was a fairly controversial figure, but why was he playing under a secret account? Well, there's a lot of reasons, and lots of controversial opinions from community members. But there is one reason at the end of the day. Well, he was banned. Permanently. Twice. Yep, Monty was permanently banned from the game twice. Quite the feat. And while he was permanently banned from the community, he was secretly playing as a top 3 competitor. In fact, Flavian was just the newest in a long line of alt accounts he'd been using for years, swapping to a new one whenever one was discovered. In total, he'd been sourced to well over 20 different players in the game's competitive history, with dozens of other unconfirmed accounts. Anyone and everyone could be a Monty alt. Much like a comic book supervillain, no matter how many times he was kicked or banned, a few months later, he would return. My personal favorite of these Monty alt accounts is Etnom, which is just simply Monty spelled backwards. Now, you might be wondering, why was he doing this in the first place? What got him banned? While there are a variety of reasons for his ban, one of the biggest ones is being involved in a major leak of beta files.
I basically had thought that the permanent ban was some bullshit.
The first time that I was introduced to the idea or person that Monty was, the whole Monty side thing.
Or just creating a whole like Japanese SSF2 community based on his alts.
It turns out the whole thing was fake.
It kind of, became a cycle where every single time I kind of wanted a fresh start, get banned, make a new account, fresh start, all that.
In fact, the Monty lore in the community runs pretty deep. With many good things for the community in recent years, but plenty of controversies from back when he was a teenager in 9B. And there were so many Monty moments throughout the game's history that I couldn't even possibly begin to go into them here. So, to summarize, Monty was a permanently banned player due to controversial actions when he was younger, and now in beta under a new account was a top 3 player.
I could at the very least have a chance to compete, because that's what I wanted to do at the end of the day.
Flavian started turning his reputation around.
I guess he has a lot of controversy, but he also has done a lot of stuff for the community, and he's just always trying to look to improve the scene.
In modern day SSF2, the majority of the community has forgiven his past actions, and his permanent ban was lifted. However, at the time, with having this triangle of players, with the best 9B Fox, Gax, a new Isaac player from Smash 4, River, and the mysterious mastermind that was Monty, it was a very wild time. All 3 of these players were winning major tournaments throughout 2017. Unfortunately though, things were going to take a turn for the worse. The whole community was expecting one of these 3 players to rise above the other 2 and become the best of the year. So who do you think did it? Well, sadly, the answer is none of them. During the peak of this 3-way rivalry, Gax would make a surprise announcement. Much like Lunary did back in 2015, Gax was going to retire from the game, instead to focus on his upcoming studies in college. But unlike Lunary, Gax would actually lose some of his final major tournaments to Kios, who now plays Pac-Man, and in his final tournament he lost to Monty. So while he did retire as the technical rank number 1, it was disputed by others. This hurt the community, but what hurt more was what followed. After Gax left, Monty would also take a break from the game. Not a full-on retirement, but he entered way less frequently ever since Gax's departure. And as for River, you guessed it, he would also take a break from the game, only entering a few tournaments in the future when updates came out, instead to focus on his career in Smash 4 and eventually in Ultimate. And also, unfortunately, in June of 2020, we would receive word that River had passed away only in his early 20s. And that day, the Super Smash Flash 2 community, and Smash as a whole, lost one of the most wholesome and beloved legends of the game. So, fall 2017 was a pretty sad time. Many of the greats, potential players to be crowned the best of the year, all dropped the game at once. And with the number 1 spot unclaimed for the first time since 2014, we would see a lot of new players strive for the spot. In fact, in 2017, we saw over 20 different players win FCR tournaments, the most of any year by far. With Gax's departure, the game was thrown back into chaos. There was, though, one last opportunity. Bowlers 2. In December of 2017, Bowlers 2 was the first ever tournament to reach over 100 entrants, and one of the few tournaments to have a cash prize for the winner. This drew in players from all over the scene, and for some of them, it was a chance to make their case for the best in the world. At least, they would have had a chance if it wasn't for Kios. Beta was no stranger to game-breaking bugs. Most of them were banned in tournaments, and others were patched out of the game. But sometimes, when a player discovers a glitch, they keep it secret, hidden away, just for the right moment.
What happened? How did you do this?
What is that?
Oh my god.
The key glitch. This was Kios' secret weapon, bringing it out for the first time on the big stage.
Kios had just lost to someone, or like something happened, and then he like privately messaged me. He was like, "Yo, I found this crazy glitch." I was like, "What now?"
I'm just gonna abandon all logic here and
This man has the key inside of his Pac-Man.
That's so broken. Like, that is ridiculous. Like, that is not okay. Like,
the key glitch was simple yet so complex. By fully charging up Pac-Man's neutral special, you could attain the key, the strongest Pac-Man projectile. Then, by performing a precise setup using the trampoline, you could physically attach the key as an active hitbox onto your body. This was game-breaking. He was essentially a walking hitbox. If you hit Pac-Man, you get hit. If you ran into him, you get hit. And best of all, it turned your hydrant into a cannonball you could launch at will. Quite frankly, it was broken. And unsurprisingly, this is probably the most controversial event in the game's history. And with Kios being a divisive player at this time, pulling this out at Bowlers 2 got him a lot of flack from the community.
I don't like Kios. Kios is like, I don't respect that man at all.
He has to be the most carried beta player I've ever seen in my entire life, bro. He was making up glitches with Pac-Man like every single day, bro. Like,
and using the glitch, Kios was able to easily push his way through the bracket, all the way to Grand Finals. And since Kios was already a top-ranked player in beta, if he could get a win here at Bowlers 2, he could become the best player in the world. All that stood in his way was the 4th seed of the tournament, a Donkey Kong player named Nos.
So, Kios, haven't seen this Pac-Man in a while. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Whew. I sure do love Pac-Man. What can I do? He just spaces that wall so perfectly.
But he's winning now. You missed Cal's almost breaking this man's shield with side B.
And yet DK won. Practically carried the tournament.
Did you just...
What the? No, okay. NBA Live 92?
Oh my god. That dude is so old.
And Nose wins.
You point out the Nose win? Okay.
How's the sound from? How's the sound from?
DK. Nas has been playing DK for so... Nas has been playing DK since...
Somehow, someway, even with the key glitch, Kios lost Bowlers 2.
Just to lose to Nos.
you have an active hitbox on you the whole time? Tell me how he didn't even win the tournament.
After this win, Nos became a legend in the community. He was already a well-known player, but stopping Kios from taking Bowlers 2 was perhaps one of the most iconic moments in the game's history. After the tournament, the key glitch was banned from future events and eventually patched out by the developers. And now with Bowlers 2 over and 2017 wrapping up, the question of who was the best was left unanswered, for the first time in the game's history. After 2017 had wrapped up, the competitive scene was in a weird place. It was the only year that out of the top 6 ranked players, no one in particular was the best of them all. And with the top 3 all taking a break from competing, it definitely opened the floodgates for a new hierarchy. And after the dust had settled from the chaos that was 2017, 3 new players would start to rise above the rest, slowly getting better and better placements, eventually even winning major tournaments.
Oh no! Oh, there it is!
These were the new top players that began to define 2018. Chaos Zero, Prolific, and MK Zaire. These were the 3 players who would all rise to the top ranks in 2018. All 3 of them had been high-level players throughout 2016 and 17, and with the old guard of top players leaving, it was their time to shine. So who exactly was the big 3? First up was the Canadian player, Chaos Zero. Chaos is a veteran player all the way back from 9B, starting competitive during the Lunary era, with his mains, Tails and Lloyd. And with the recent balance patch, 1.0.3.2, we saw some big buffs to Tails as a character, and he actually rose up to the #1 spot on tier lists. So as you can imagine, the best Tails player with the new best character was a major threat in tournaments. The next player to rise up to the top 3 was the best US player, Prolific. After Nos' outstanding performance with Donkey Kong, showing the entire community what the character could do, Prolific was the first one to truly bring out the full potential. In fact, Prolific was going on a tear in early 2018, winning sets over Kios, Monty, and even Nos in the Ditto. And lastly, in the Big 3 was MK Zaire. Zaire was the other Canadian player in the Big 3. Much like his name would imply, his main was Meta Knight, but he also began to play Marth as a secondary in 2018. As for Zaire as a player, he was one of the few people in the community who could actually compete with Chaos and Prolific, and after winning some major tournaments against the 2, he earned his spot amongst the top 3. All 3 of the Big 3 had won major tournaments over one another and the entire community as a whole. These were the 3 players that defined the 2018 competitive scene. In the battle of the Big 3, all 3 of the players would quickly reach the rank of God of the Game on the FCR, and we began to see a clash between at least 2 of the Big 3 in almost every tournament. Chaos Zero would dominate tournaments with the newly buffed Tails, Zaire would show the entire community what his new secondary Marth could really do, and Prolific would win multiple tournaments in a row, creating small winning streaks. and the three of them made a unique triangle with one another. In fact, at the time, in total set counts, Zaire had a winning record against Prolific, Prolific had a winning record against Chaos, and Chaos actually had a winning record against Zaire.
They kind of have like that triangle, just trying to one-up each other, I think.
This was the golden era of competition. Each tournament was more exciting than the last. Everyone in the community wanted to know which of the big three would come out on top. And while they were all winning, we began to see one of them take a lead.
I just kept seeing the same names all the time. Prolific. I'm like, what the hell? With DK?
Me and Chaos are basically the only players that like can beat him consistently. And like once Prolific gets momentum, it's over.
Pro? I hate Pro, dude.
If you're playing Prolific, you're probably going to end up in a combo video.
Please include this in the documentary. He still owes me $100.
Prolific took a lead in tournament wins, winning Universe Classic 8, Universe Classic 10, and Universe Classic 14. I mean, straight up, Universe Classic was the monthly tournament series that everyone was entering, and Prolific was the player who was winning almost all of them. In fact, he even has a combo named after it, the UC winner.
Alright, Fear, we'll get you there.
UC8 winner.
Oh, there's a UC winner.
However, at the time, to call Prolific the undisputed best of the year wasn't quite possible. At least, not yet. Much like every past year, there was another major tournament, a milestone for the game's competition. This was the tournament at the end of the summer to determine the best of the year. And Exodus 2 was massive, being the first tournament to dethrone Bowlers 2, with the largest prize pot yet of over $100 and well over 100 entrants. The tournament had tons of big names in attendance, and almost everybody in the FCR was entering. Players like Nos, Kios, and even Monty would enter, as well as, of course, all three of the big three. On the big stage, this was the time to settle it once and for all. Out of the big three, who was the best? The first clash of the gods was Prolific vs. Zaire in winner's semis. Prolific advanced to winners finals to face his other rival, Chaos Zero. Prolific had beaten both Chaos and Zaire, but Zaire would have one final chance in Grand Finals. And with the final standings of Exodus 2, Prolific had shown the world who the leader of the big three truly was.
But after Gax retired, after Gax left, it was all Prolific.
Like after Lunary, he was really starting to become like one of the most dominant players that you've ever seen.
Prolific at the time was on another level, and was the best player of 2018.
2018 summer, very easily one of the best times of SS2 all time. Every good player was entering, and there was just like constant like, it was a very active era in 2018 summer especially. But then 2019 came.
2019, the dead year for competitive. For some reason, throughout the game's history, whenever competition was at its best, it wasn't long until something devastating would occur. And after the golden age that was 2018, 2019 would be a major setback.
Yeah, a lot of people do agree that 2019 was kind of the break year.
One of the most annoying patches yet, because it really encouraged a lot of very annoying play to the point where people just got frustrated and just lost interest into the game as a whole.
I loved 1.1, but I also think 1.1 is one of the worst patches.
We were kind of worried for a game because we had FCR events coming out. They were getting 5 entrants, ended up being canceled because no check-ins.
In a time where top players weren't playing.
deadest of dead zones, the only players that would enter. Like, I was considered a threat back then.
Yeah, late 2019. It really felt like the game was dead. I really felt like it.
In 2019, the game was dying. More and more players were leaving the scene. Tournaments were getting smaller and smaller, and the scene was struggling to stay alive. Even the big three, the lead figures now in the competitive scene, would all practically vanish in 2019. Now, why was the scene dying? Well, there's two major reasons. Update 1.1 and Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. First was Update 1.1. This was the first major update to the game since beta's launch, and on paper, it should have been great, adding a new playable fighter being Pichu, and removing port priority, one of the community's most hated features. However, little did the devs know, 1.1 would be the most divisive patch in the game's history, mostly due to the negative impact on the game's meta.
See, the meta was basically Marth. Even though Marth wasn't the best character, it was basically Marth, because like
Marth especially, there were a lot of Marths. Almost all the tournaments I played in, there was a Marth in it. Like Marth in top 8.
Like, I remember there was a period in time where literally every single fucking person played Marth.
Much like Fox had done in 2016, Marth had become the dominant force in the meta, as the most played character in tournaments during this year. However, many of these old school players didn't like the 1.1 meta, including MK Zaire, the best Marth player in 2018. And in combination with this controversial meta is the second reason, Smash Bros. Ultimate. The release of Ultimate was detrimental to Flash 2's competitive scene. Many of the veteran players would migrate to the newer game, and all the new players who were coming to Flash 2 started being redirected to Smash Bros. Ultimate. But the community wasn't dead yet. Some players would choose to continue pursuing competitive Flash 2, despite the odds. And because of that, those who did stick with the game got significantly better throughout 2019.
Some would call it low, but also it was a lot of rebuilding in the community. While everybody was away, this like second tier of players had kind of developed enough to contest the quote unquote first tier of players.
And although most of these tournaments were getting smaller and smaller, there were still a few big tournaments that managed to pull large player bases. And those few tournaments did have new competition. We saw all of these second tier players from 2018 start to rise up, as if this was a training arc for the community.
I'd say like Vashy's like a new gen, like top level player. Yeah, around 1.1, like him, RC, and Ace, I feel like that's when they rose to like the top level. Like,
the overall skill level of the game was increasing, with all sorts of new players joining the game during this time, who over the course of 2019 would become better and better. One such player was the best Marth player who was leading this new Marth movement, Ace 2020. And while there were many different names who were arguably the best of the year,
this was actually the patch I consider myself the best. The rankings actually robbed me.
And out of these top players, the one with the highest ranking on the FCR would be Ace 2020, the leader of this Marth revolution and the best ranked player in 2019. This dark age for the game was a weird time, but we did have one thing going for us, this new batch of highly skilled players, all training away in the mountains. So if the big three ever would return, they'd have a challenge, and eventually, that day would come. If 2019 was almost the death of the community, then 2020 was the complete and utter revival.
That was definitely the revival of SSF2. That was definitely the turning point.
1.2 was one of the best things to happen to the community, straight up. It brought a lot of players back, revived the community, brought new characters, brought hype.
In February of 2020, Update 1.2 would release. This update was massive, essentially saving the game's competitive scene. The patch added 6 brand new characters and plenty more content to bring back all those players that left during 2019. This patch would also fix some of those issues the old players had with 1.1, such as some fairly big nerfs to characters like Marth. This update had saved the community. Almost everybody who had quit was coming back to the game, and the tournament scene was growing almost immediately with 1.2's release. Even large content creators were giving Flash 2 another shot. And with the game finally being back in the spotlight, it was the perfect time for another tournament, something to reignite that competitive flame of 2018.
Like, now was the perfect time for an extremely large tournament to have the biggest tournament of all time, and that's exactly what Bowlers 3 was.
And yeah, and huge money prize fund, and everyone entered. Almost everyone could enter.
It is definitely the most iconic tournament of SSF2 history.
bringing us all the way back to the start. The $500 tournament with well over 500 registered players. Bowlers 3. This was the tournament that everyone was attending. In fact, it brought players from all over the scene. Old 9B players who had retired, players from different regions from all over the world, this new generation of players from 2019, and of course, the return of the Big Three, all in attendance. And after that training arc of 2019, it was time for the community to face the Big Three. In winner's side of the bracket, all three of the Big Three were matched up against new gen players early on. The best Falco of 2019, Vash, had defeated MK Zaire. But it wasn't just him. All three of the Big Three were defeated by new gen players, and simultaneously were sent to the lower bracket. It all but seemed that this new generation had surpassed the Big Three, and shortly after being sent to the loser's side, Chaos and Zaire would be eliminated from the tournament, leaving Prolific as the only remaining player in the Big Three. But the odds were stacked against him. For Prolific to win the tournament, he'd have a long line of high-skilled players in his way. He would need the bracket run of a lifetime.
And
Oh yeah! He brought it back!
Winner.
UC winner!
Yeah. Trying to push this lead in his favor. No.
Oh jeez!
Let's go, Prolific!
Oh,
we're seeing
no.
what Simon did. Simon did.
I don't like this.
He does what Prolific does. He just starts styling on everyone.
On somebody's shield, for example. And Prolific getting the strong punish. He's up.
Prolific got his revenge on Ace in loser semis. And next up was RC, the best Pikachu in the entire game.
There we go.
Well, I don't even think Prolific likes Dreamland that much, but I think he knows how much RC hates Dreamland. Oh my
Jesus.
god.
Prolific was down 3 stocks to 1. Game 5, losers finals.
Yeah. But even with all these differences,
Up
throw,
throw, fair, up air.
up there,
That's gonna do
and
it.
that's the game.
He brought it back.
Oh my god.
He brought it back.
How does he do it? Unbelievable. And that's why I'm a Prolific fan.
Prolific had demolished his way through the losers bracket, and now stood in grand finals. Prolific versus Vash. And before they played grand finals, Vash made an interesting proposal. Double or nothing. The players agreed that the winner would take both players' prize money.
I did it because, win or lose, badass.
Good pivot down B. And Vash with the up throw there, winning game 1. Yeah.
Oh no!
Yeah.
Oh no!
I was like, a lot of people thought Vash was gonna win. A lot of people thought Vash was gonna win. I was like, Prolific is gonna win, and I know he will.
I was gonna Prolific percent. This could be the stock.
Oh my god!
The great equalizer. Yep, the equalizer.
I was super nervous, like my hands were shaking.
And Vash, Falco's grab coming into effect. Oh my god. besides, the DI mixed up. That's it with that fair. If Bash loses this, he gets less than 7th place.
UC winner to win it!
UC winner.
UC
Close it
winner
out.
to take the tournament.
Classic. Now that's the bowler's winner. Now that you think about
Prolific
it.
has won
Oh
the
my God.
tournament. That game was probably the game that solidified Prolific as one of the best players of all time.
And arguably the greatest player of all time, just straight up. So
Prolific, second or first best SF2 player of all time.
I think Prolific is one of, if not the greatest players of SSF2 in general.
With his win at Bowlers 3, Prolific cemented himself in SSF2's history as the greatest of all time. He was the Donkey Kong player to push the game to its limits and show us just how exciting it could truly be. This brings us to the modern era, with new players, new storylines, and a thriving scene that continues to grow. Whether you're an old school player or waiting for frame makers, there's never been a better time to join the community.
Be 50 years old, and I'll go back and I'll recall the time when I was 16, 17 years old.
Even though I stopped playing it many years ago, like SSF2 still means a lot to me.
I hope people, whatever their purpose is, just keep enjoying the game, you know?
there are people that care about the scene a lot. And that's, at the end of the day, that's what matters. Like, as long as there's like 3 people, that's a community, right?
From our ups to our downs, there's never been a grassroots community I've ever seen or been more proud to be a part of. We've come a long way from the school computer labs, and sure, we may just be a flash game, but at the same time, we're so much more than just that.
Oh my god! It's a
Mac. That's a smash attack.
Don't know about the Mac combos, bro.
And at the end of the day, it'll always be more than just a flash game. Thank you to everyone in the SSF2 community, to all the backers on Kickstarter, to anyone who got this far in the video. I really do appreciate you all. This project is far from perfect, and there's so much lore and pockets of history that were left out and didn't quite make it. And I'm really sorry if you were disappointed with the outcome. It's honestly a miracle that this could even be created at all for the Flash game we love, and I'm very thankful I had the opportunity to create this. But even if it's not perfect, I'm still happy with it, and it's a cool way to preserve our history as a competitive game. It was an absolute blast to make this documentary. There were so many memories I got to relive and cool moments to see again. And for that, I'm really thankful, and I hope you guys enjoyed it too. So I just want to say one last time, thank you so much for watching.
Easy. Really just brain dead easy character. I can see you, Miracle. You didn't even hit him. You missed me.